It's a beautiful Wednesday morning. Welcome once again to Morning Spring on Western Spring Television. Here on Morning Spring, we bring you the best of news and information, starting, of course, with the newspaper review segment. Then we dive into critical matters of national importance. If it affects us as a people, then we get to talk about it right here, bringing you the best of analysis, speaking with critical stakeholders on issues, speaking frankly about governance, leadership, democracy, what have you. That exactly is what we do here every weekday on Morning Spring. Daniel Emeka is my name, and I bid you welcome once again to Morning Spring. A beautiful day promises to be a beautiful show, and you do not want to miss any part of the program today. Talking about speaking truth to power. That's what we do here. We say it as it is, without any sentiments attached. We bring you the stories, we bring you the analysis, and of course, we also let you, get the views of our analysts, stakeholders on various diverse topics. And that's exactly what we do here. Nigeria is our nation. We love Nigeria. I love Nigeria. And it's our responsibility to make sure Nigeria works. Whenever we talk about Nigeria, it's not as if sometimes, it's not as if we are pessimistic. No, we just have to face reality. We just have to say the truth. There are some uncomfortable conversations we need to have as a people. If we must move forward, we can't keep patronizing our leaders all the time. And whenever we speak, it doesn't really mean we hate the government or we are trying to criticize unnecessarily. What we do here is, proffer solutions through constructive criticisms. And that is exactly what we'll be doing today as well on the program. Once again, welcome. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. We'll take a quick break, and when we return, we dive straight into the front pages of the newspapers. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. The newspapers are here, and this morning we are starting from the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper. On the front page of the Daily Trust, how flood swept away 2 sisters, others in Zaria. How flood swept away 2 sisters, others in Zaria. There was a heavy downpour in Zaria, Kaduna State on Monday, and unfortunately, 2 sisters were swept away in that flood. Again, NIMET and of course the Meteorological Agency has been given warnings concerning flood in several states of the nation. So it is in our best interest to make sure that we take necessary precautions to avoid this unfortunate incident. This is September. We might be having quite a lot of rain in some parts of Nigeria. It's been predicted already. We should expect some, heavy rains in September, and we do wish everyone, keeps safe, stay safe. The emergency agencies, emergency management agencies should also do what is necessary to protect the people from this flood, because sometimes it's not enough just to warn people concerning floods. What measures are being taken to make sure that the people are safe? If they need to be evacuated, then they should be evacuated before the floods. And that's exactly what we should be doing. Away from that, still on the front page of the Daily Trust this morning, we won't implement fuel tax now. Oyedele, we won't implement fuel tax now. That's coming from the tax committee boss, Oyedele, right there. Ways to recover funds sent to wrong account. Ways to recover funds sent to wrong account. You might want to read up that story on page 33. If you have, perhaps inadvertently sent money to an account which you were not meant to send money to, there are ways by which you can actually recover those funds. You might want to read up that story, because sometimes when you make such mistakes, Here in Nigeria, sometimes we say "otilo," which means it's gone. However, it shouldn't be so. So there are actually ways for you to recover money sent to wrong accounts inadvertently. You might want to read up that story on page 33 of the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. Away from that, on the front page of the Daily Trust this morning, why suicide is becoming common. Why suicide is becoming common. You find that story on page 5. Why are we having more cases of suicide? Recently, we talked about, cases of teenage suicide, but not in Nigeria anyway, as a result of their interaction with AI, artificial intelligence. And Meta actually came out to say that they'll be restricting how chatbots, interact with teenagers just to prevent teenage suicide. But again, suicide is, becoming more common, even in this part of the world. You might want to read up why that is so. Away from that, female accountant found dead inside car in FCT. Female accountant found dead inside car in Federal Capital Territory. Quite an unfortunate one right there. You'll find that story on page 20. Below that, condemnation as Israel military hits Hamas leaders in Doha. Condemnation as Israel military hits Hamas leaders in Doha. You can read up that story on page 32. Israel actually carried out some strikes in Doha, that's the capital of Qatar, targeting some Hamas leaders. According to a BBC report I saw this morning, about 6 people were killed in that attack, although Hamas is claiming that their leaders are still safe. We also understand that a member of the Qatar military security guard was also killed in that attack. You might want to read up details of that story on page 22. Nigeria's 2026 World Cup hopes uncertain after South Africa draw. Nigeria's 2026 World Cup hopes uncertain after South Africa draw. You find that story on page 38. So Nigeria actually played a draw with South Africa. Now our qualification is, hanging in the balance, just hanging right there, uncertain. And most Nigerians have said, why do we always have to rely on, permutations and calculations just to qualify when we have some nations who qualify effortlessly? Well, here we are, we have to rely on some, hopes and calculations because right now it is uncertain if we will qualify for the World Cup. Away from that, moving to the bottom strip, DSS resolves Nupeng Dangote group rift, strike suspended. DSS resolves Nupeng Dangote group rift, strike suspended. You'll find a story on page 31. Yesterday we talked about it right here on this platform. Nupeng deciding to go on strike on Monday as a result of some, industrial policies. According to them, Dangote was, requiring them to sign an undertaking not to join any union. That's talking about the tanker drivers. But a Dangote spokesman came out yesterday, Tuesday, to say that's not true, that was not part of the agreement, that it was just blackmail. Now we understand that DSS has stepped in just to, settle that rift. And thankfully, they will not be going on that strike. The strike has been suspended as if this report is anything to go by. And away from that, all right, I guess that'll be all from the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. Next, we'll take a look at the Punch newspaper. On the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning, doctors to decide on nationwide strike today. Doctors to decide on nationwide strike today. With a rider, NATSNEC meets to review government's response to demands. Um, NAMED decries $1 billion yearly spending on medical tourism. And by the way, NARD is a National Association of Resident Doctors. We had a conversation with the president of the National Association of Resident Doctors right here on this program a couple of days ago. I'm talking about Dr. Oshundara. I mean, talking about the reasons why they decided to, give that ultimatum. A 10-day ultimatum was given, which would elapse today, 10th September 2025. So today is the last day, and we understand that they are meeting to decide whether or not they will proceed with the proposed strike. That's if government doesn't meet their needs. They talked about different issues like being understaffed. Most of the hospitals do not have sufficient doctors as a result of the brain drain. Several doctors having left the nation for greener pastures. Now, the few ones who are left in Nigeria are actually being, overworked and underpaid according to the doctors. And some of them have not been paid their medical residency training fund. That's part of what they are demanding, and some arrears from their consolidated medical salary structure. That's COMMES. Some states are still owing them. They've not paid their arrears. States like Kaduna or your state, they're having issues with some of them. So those are parts of the reasons why they gave that ultimatum, which would elapse today. So let's just hope as they meet today and review government's response that they do not proceed with that strike. Because at the end of the day, it is the people, the ordinary citizens of Nigeria, who will suffer for it when doctors go on strike. Because private hospitals may not be able to handle the workload. And of course, not everyone can afford private hospitals in Nigeria. Away from that, still on the top story, we have another rider below that. Tinubu restates commitment to health sector transformation, vows to end hospitals' power crisis with hybrid solutions. That's interesting. Tinubu restates commitment to health sector transformation, vows to end hospitals' power crisis with hybrid solutions. It's high time we did that. I'm talking about power crisis in hospitals. Sometimes when you walk into hospitals and you see the ICU, that's the intensive care unit, and of course the emergency unit not having power supply, you begin to wonder, how on earth are they supposed to attend to the patients? Now the president is saying that that will come to an end, that the era of power outages in hospitals will be coming to an end. You can read up that story on pages 7 and 29 of the Punch newspaper this morning. Away from that, on the top strip, Nupeng suspends strike. Nupeng suspends strike as Dangote accepts union's demands. National Union of Petroleum and Natural Gas Workers suspends strike as Dangote accepts union's demands. You'll find that story on page 29. 31 states' domestic debt hits 2.57 trillion naira. 31 states' domestic debt hits 2.57 trillion naira. That's quite humongous. You find that story on page 23. Away from that, 2027 presidency, Jonathan splits South-South PDP. 2027 presidency, Jonathan splits South-South PDP. You might want to find out how. How exactly is Jonathan splitting South-South PDP? You'll find that story on page 2 of the Punch newspaper this morning. Still on the front page of the Punch newspaper, no immediate plan to implement fuel surcharge. That's coming from federal government. No immediate plan to implement fuel surcharge. You find that story on page 24. Of course, there's been some uproar concerning the intended 5% surcharge on fuel products. Now, the federal government has said they are not implementing it immediately, at least not yet for now. Still on the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning, PDP, SAN's protest as Senate blocks Natasha's return. PDP, SAN's protest as Senate blocks Natasha's return. You can read of that story on page 18. Talking about suspended Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan of Kogi Central, she was handed a 6-month suspension. Now the senator is saying she's still suspended. She had made plans to return to office when she, comes back from a London trip. But now the senator is saying the suspension still stands. So the drama continues. Recall that Senator Natasha actually tried to return to office just before the Senate went on recess, and she was blocked by security officials. Now again, the Senate is saying she is still suspended. Away from that, still on the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning. 5 soldiers, terrorists, feared killed in Zamfara clash. 5 soldiers, terrorists, feared killed in Zamfara clash. You can read of that story on page 18. And on the bottom strip, Osun kingmakers reject move to dethrone jailed monarch. Osun kingmakers reject move to dethrone jailed monarch. You'll find that story on page 29. We talked about that monarch here was involved in fraud and was arrested and detained by U.S. officials. Quite unfortunate. Talking about the COVID-19 funds, he actually allegedly set up some organizations and gave out some loans and swindled quite a lot of organizations in the U.S. Now he has to pay the price for it. And kingmakers in Osun State are saying they will not dethrone him. Perhaps they still see him as a worthy representative, despite the heinous act committed, the fraudulent act attributed to him. Away from that, I'm still on the bottom strip of the Punch newspaper this morning. Vehicle theft. 3 Nigerians jailed 96 years in Ghana. Vehicle theft. 3 Nigerians jailed 96 years in Ghana. This is quite interesting. You find a story on pages 4 and 5. So for vehicle theft, we have 3 Nigerians jailed 96 years. And in Ghana, well, crime is crime. We will always, speak against that. When people engage in criminal activities, they should be made to pay for it. But again, 96 years for vehicle theft, some people might interpret that as, killing an ant with a sledgehammer. Anyway, you might want to read up that story on pages 4 and 5 of the Punch newspaper this morning. Away from that, South Africa dents Eagles World Cup hopes after stalemate. South Africa dents Eagles World Cup hopes after stalemate. You can read of that story on page 31. Of course, the fate of the Super Eagles is hanging in the balance right now. We are not sure if we will qualify for the World Cup or not, because we actually played a draw with South Africa. That'll be all from the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning. Next, we take a look at the Daily Times newspaper. On the front page of the Daily Times newspaper this morning, economic reforms once temporary, recovery permanent. That's coming from Shetima. Economic reforms once temporary, recovery permanent. Coming from Shetima. You can read up that story on page 15. When the government, when the leaders tell us that the wounds from the reforms are actually temporary, that Nigerians who, just, tighten their belts, be patient. We had a conversation here yesterday. The question is, how long, how long will you keep telling Nigerians to be patient, to endure this suffering? when you as leaders are not doing the same thing, when you are not showing good example, when you are not cutting down on the cost of governance, when you are still living your flamboyant lifestyles and even considering increasing your remuneration, and you turn around in the same breath to tell Nigerians to be patient, that the pains as a result of the reforms are just temporary, but the results are permanent. Again, as Nigerians, we need to hold our leaders accountable. You need to show a good example. If you're telling us that these reforms are necessary, of course, we know they are necessary. The question is, how long should we have to wait? How long will it take for the results to trickle down to the average Nigerian on the streets, such that the average man, can feed properly, can send their children to school, have access to quality health care? We are not seeing that. Now, doctors are considering going on strike, lecturers, the same thing. So what part of the economy, what sector of the economy is truly feeling the result of this reform? Recently, we talked about incessant borrowing by the government. Recall that the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tajuddin Abbas, he came out publicly to condemn, the incessant borrowings of the government, talking about the debt profile rising and debt to GDP ratio having risen from about 40 to 52% thereabout. But later, he still came out to retract the statement. But the facts are there. We are Nigerians. We all know what's going on. Having debts of about 149 trillion naira, according to him, and it's still rising. Just recently, the federal government still approached the World Bank begging for a $1.7 billion loan. So how exactly has these loans cushioned the effects of removal of fuel subsidy? That's the million-dollar question. So if you tell Nigerians to be patient, we need to see you as leaders showing us good example. You need to cut down on the cost of governance. That's the only way to gain the trust of the people. Away from that, still on the front page of the Daily Times newspaper this morning. On the top strip, multiple taxation killing hotel business in Nigeria, coming from Association. Multiple taxation killing hotel business in Nigeria. You can read of that story on page 2. Ignore National Assembly. Get ready to resume plenary. PDP charges Senator Akpoti Uduaghan. You can find a story on page 14, telling the suspended senator to ignore the National Assembly and get ready to resume plenary. That's coming from the People's Democratic Party, PDP. Again, let's just hope we do not see another drama unfolding. If she tries to resume and she's blocked by security officials again, come on, there should be better ways to resolve this crisis. And of course, her lawyers, a team of lawyers and legal advisors should actually look into this to avoid any unnecessary drama. Away from that, moving to the bottom strip of the Daily Times newspaper this morning. NCAA summons airlines over passengers' recurrent complaints. NCAA summons airlines over passengers' recurrent complaints. You find a story on page 7 that's talking about the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority. The UK government announces £19 million funding for climate resilience, health development in Nigeria. United Kingdom government announces £19 million funding for climate resilience, health development in Nigeria. You can read of that story on page 4. CBN molds collaboration with finance, trade ministries, budget office. You find a story on page 4 as well. Reps summon transport minister over train derailment. Reps summon transport minister over train derailment. You'll find a story on page 8. And on the red strip, you have Nupeng suspends strike, reaches agreement with Dangote refinery. Nupeng suspends strike, reaches agreement with Dangote refinery. Recall that yesterday Dangote actually came out, Dangote Group came out to say that whether or not the strike proceeds, that Nigerians will not suffer for it. The fuel will continue to be distributed to the end users. But now, thankfully, Nupeng, they've decided to suspend that strike after reaching an agreement with Dangote Group. And that'll be all from the front page of the Daily Times newspaper this morning. That also brings us to a conclusion of the newspaper review segment of the show today. We'll take a quick break, and when we return, we look at some critical issues concerning Nigeria, concerning our electoral processes. So we'll take a closer look at that and some of the reforms we need. If truly we are to move forward as a nation, we need to look at the processes that bring our leaders, the processes through which our leaders emerge is very critical. We've been struggling with that for quite a while now. And this morning, we'll be taking a closer look at that. You do not want to miss that segment. Join us again.